The great palace of the alien Queen Lyra stood high above the city of Aravel. Its tall towers touched the sky and its walls shone like silver in the evening light. From the outside it looked like a place of perfect strength and beauty. People looked up to it with respect and sometimes with fear. Inside those walls lived the queen who carried the weight of her people on her shoulders. To the world she was a ruler, but to a small child inside those walls she was only a mother. That evening the halls were quiet. Most of the court had gone to their homes and the council was finished for the day. Lyra walked slowly to her private chambers. Her steps were steady, her long robe moving behind her like flowing water. She looked calm, but her mind was tired. Endless meetings about trade, borders, and supplies had drained her. She longed for something simple, something warm. When she opened the door to her chamber, her daughter Myra ran toward her. Myra was young, with bright eyes that carried more joy than all the stars outside the palace. She held something small in her hands. Her smile was wide as she looked up at her mother. "Mother, look what I made today," Myra said with excitement. Lyra bent down, her face softening at once. She saw the toy. It was made of crystal threads woven together in a delicate shape. It looked like a small bird with wings spread wide. It was not perfect, but it carried the charm of a child's effort. Lyra's heart warmed as she took it gently in her hand. "You made this with your own hands," Lyra said softly. Myra nodded proudly. "Yes. I worked all day with the helpers. I wanted to show you first. Do you like it?" Lyra smiled, and her royal mask slipped away. Here she was not a queen of armies. She was a mother, and the toy in her hand felt more important than all the treasures of her empire. She was about to tell Myra how beautiful it was when the fragile thread slipped against her hand. With the smallest movement the toy cracked. A sharp sound echoed in the quiet room. The wings of the little bird snapped apart. Pieces of crystal fell to the ground. Lyra froze. Myra's eyes widened, and her lips trembled. "My toy," Myra whispered, her voice breaking. Lyra's heart sank. She had faced battles. She had spoken to leaders who threatened war. She had never felt pain like the look in her daughter's eyes at that moment. Myra's face turned red, tears forming quickly. She bent down, trying to gather the broken pieces with small hands. "I did not mean it," Lyra said at once. She reached out, but Myra pulled the pieces close to her chest. "I did not want to break it, Myra. I only wanted to hold it." But the child could not stop her tears. She had worked all day. She had dreamed of showing her mother the gift. Now it was gone. She sat on the floor, shoulders shaking. Lyra knelt beside her daughter. For the first time in many years she felt her own eyes fill with tears. The strong queen who never showed weakness to her people now felt powerless before a child's sorrow. She placed her arms around Myra, holding her gently. "Myra, forgive me," Lyra whispered. "I have made a mistake." The girl cried into her mother's robe. Lyra closed her eyes, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. She wished she could face an enemy instead. She wished she could fight with sword and shield, because that was easier than watching her child cry. The broken pieces lay on the floor, shining in the soft light of the room. They looked small, but they carried great weight. Lyra felt a heavy guilt. She thought of all the great treasures in the palace, all the wealth her people had gathered. None of it could replace what had been lost in her daughter's hands. As time passed, Myra's sobs grew softer, but the pain in her small voice remained. "It was my favorite, Mother. I wanted you to be proud of me." Lyra's arms tightened around her. I am proud of you, more than you know. The toy may be broken, but the effort you gave, the love you placed into it, that cannot be broken. Myra sniffled and looked at her mother's face. Lyra brushed away her tears, yet her own eyes still carried sorrow. She was not only comforting her child. She was also trying to heal her own heart. That night Lyra sat long after Myra had fallen asleep beside her. She looked at the broken toy on the table. The crystal pieces reflected the light of the lamps, like tiny stars scattered across wood. Lyra reached out and touched them again, but she did not try to join them. She feared she would only break them more. Her mind was restless. She thought of all the times she had faced challenges in the council hall. Those moments seemed small now. What use was her crown if she could not protect the joy of her only child? She thought of Myra's words about wanting to make her proud. It cut deeply into her heart. Lyra whispered to herself in the quiet room, I must find a way to fix this. I cannot let her believe she failed. I cannot let her think her gift was lost. The night was long, and the queen sat in silence, her hands resting on the table. Her face, so strong before her people, was soft with sorrow. She had never felt more human in her life. Outside the palace the stars shone bright, but inside the queen's chamber the broken toy lay still. It was more than a toy. It was a test, one she had not yet learned how to face. And in her heart, the queen waited for an answer, not knowing that soon help would arrive from the most unexpected place. The next morning, the city of Aravel was alive with activity. Alien merchants prepared their shops, flying vehicles moved across the sky, and the palace guards kept a careful watch over the city. Yet, high above the streets, the queen's chambers remained quiet. Lyra still thought of the broken toy and her daughter's tearful eyes. She could not stop imagining Myra's small hands trying to pick up the shattered pieces. Meanwhile, beyond the walls of the palace, a small human transport glided toward Aravel's landing platform. The ship was simple and not particularly fast. It bore the signs of a long journey from a distant world. Humans were rare visitors in the sector, and many citizens looked up at the craft with curiosity and some suspicion. Inside the ship, a man named Tomasz checked the instruments and adjusted the controls. Tomasz was a mechanic by trade, someone who understood machines better than words. He had traveled to Aravel to deliver supplies and offer maintenance to the city's technology. Tomasz did not know much about alien politics, or the strict hierarchy of the Queen's court. He cared little for titles and crowns. He cared about work, fairness, and the value of small things. As the transport landed on the platform, city guards approached with cautious eyes. Tomasz stepped out carefully, holding his toolkit. He noticed the towers of the palace above him. They were taller than any building he had ever seen, and the walls gleamed in the morning sunlight. He felt small, but he was not afraid. He had traveled far and faced difficulties in the past. Machines could be complicated, but he had always found solutions. A young servant approached him. Her uniform was neat, and her hands carried papers and small devices. She bowed slightly. "You are Tomasz, the human mechanic," she said. "The Queen has requested your assistance." Tomasz raised his eyebrows. "The Queen," he repeated. He had expected to be asked to repair city machinery or the transport ship, not summoned to the palace itself. Yet he nodded politely. "I am here to help," he said. The servant led him through the city gates and into the palace corridors. Tomasz could not help but notice the details of the alien architecture. Walls shimmered with colors that changed as he walked. Soft lights illuminated tapestries depicting scenes of history and honor. He had never seen anything like it, but he focused on the task ahead. Eventually, they arrived at a large chamber. The servant stopped and spoke softly. "The queen is inside. She is waiting for you." Tomasz took a deep breath and stepped forward. He entered the chamber, and the room fell silent for a moment. Lyra stood near the table, looking at the broken toy again. The crystal pieces caught the light and reflected small rainbows across the floor. She looked up at the human. Her face was composed, but her eyes still carried sorrow. "You are Tomasz," she said, her voice calm but soft. "I have been told you can fix things that seem impossible." Tomasz nodded. "I try my best. Tell me what needs fixing." Lyra gestured toward the toy. "This was my daughter's gift. It is broken, and I cannot repair it myself. I need your help." Tomasz looked at the small crystal bird. He had seen many machines in his life, but he had never worked on something so delicate. He knelt beside it, examining each piece. The bird was fragile, and the threads were fine. One wrong movement could shatter it further. "Your daughter made this herself?" Tomasz asked. "Yes," Lyra said. "She worked all day. It was important to her. It is important to me." Tomasz nodded. He could feel the weight of responsibility. "I will try to repair it. I cannot promise it will be perfect, but I will do my best." Lyra's lips curved in a small, hopeful smile. "That is all I ask." As Tomasz worked, Lyra watched quietly. She saw the careful way he handled each piece, the way he examined the threads, and the way he never rushed. Myra, who had been sitting nearby, peeked at him with wide eyes. The child's curiosity returned slowly as she watched the human move with patience. "Can I help?" Myra asked softly. Tomasz smiled gently. "Yes, you can hold the pieces steady while I fit them together." Myra nodded and followed his instructions. Slowly, she began to feel part of the repair. Her hands were small, but Tomasz guided them with patience. With each careful movement, the toy began to look more whole. Lyra's heart softened as she watched the two of them work. She realized this human saw the value not only in machines but also in the joy of a child. Hours passed, and the room remained quiet except for the soft sounds of tools and careful movements. Tomasz and Myra worked together, and Lyra observed, learning something she had never understood in council meetings or royal speeches. Strength was not always about power. Sometimes strength was about patience, care, and the ability to fix what was broken with your hands and your heart. Finally, Tomasz stepped back. The toy was mended. It was not perfect, but it shone again, small pieces joined carefully so the bird looked whole. Myra's eyes sparkled, and she held it close to her chest. Lyra felt a warmth she had not felt in years. She looked at Tomasz and said softly, "You have done more than fix a toy. You have brought happiness back to my daughter. You have taught me something important." Tomasz shrugged slightly, embarrassed by praise. "I only did what anyone would do. Small things can matter a great deal." Lyra nodded slowly. She realized that she had learned something she had forgotten in her busy life. A crown and a throne were powerful, but love, care, and patience were the strongest tools of all. Myra hugged Tomasz and then hugged her mother. Lyra felt a lightness in her heart that had been missing for a long time. The broken toy had been repaired, but more than that, a bond had formed between a human, a queen, and her child. Outside, the city continued its busy life, unaware of the quiet miracle in the queen's chambers. High above, the palace walls reflected the morning sun, shining with the same light that now filled the hearts of the three inside. Lyra watched Tomasz gather his tools to leave. She realized that humans were different from her people. They did not carry crowns or titles, yet they had a strength that mattered even more. The human mechanic had come from a distant world, but he had touched something that no palace walls or royal decrees could ever reach. As Tomasz left the chamber, Lyra whispered, "Thank you." The words were simple, but they carried more meaning than any council speech or command she had ever spoken. The arrival of the human had brought hope, healing, and understanding. The queen understood now that even the smallest acts of care could change everything. And somewhere in the city of Araval, the smallest crystal bird rested safely in a child's hands, shining brighter than it had before. The day after Tomasz repaired Myra's toy, the palace felt different. Light seemed warmer in the halls, and Lyra walked with a lighter step. The queen had spent the night reflecting on what had happened. For hours, she had thought about her daughter's smile, the broken toy, and the human who had quietly fixed something that she, a powerful queen, could not. Despite the palace's grandeur, Lyra now understood that not all problems could be solved with orders or strength. Some required patience, skill, and care. And she knew that Tomasz possessed all three. That morning, a message arrived for Tomasz through the palace messenger system. It was written in simple words, asking him to return to the queen's private chambers. He was curious but also cautious. Humans were rare here, and being called directly by a queen was unusual. He gathered his tools, not knowing what to expect. When he entered the chamber, he found Lyra waiting, her posture calm but her expression serious. The room was quiet, filled only with the soft morning light and the small crystal pieces of the repaired toy. Myra was nearby, playing with other small creations, her laughter light and soft. "Thank you for returning," Lyra said. Her voice was steady but carried a hidden urgency. "I have a task for you, and it is unusual." Tomasz nodded. "I am ready," he said, keeping his hands relaxed. He had repaired many machines, but he had never been asked to work directly for a queen. He did not feel nervous, he only wanted to understand what needed fixing. Lyra motioned toward a small box on the table. "This belonged to my mother," she explained. "It is an old piece of machinery, created long before my time. I wish to repair it, but I lack the knowledge. The servants tried and failed. I thought perhaps you could succeed." Tomasz examined the box carefully. It was intricate, made of alien metals and small circuits that he had never seen before. Despite its complexity, he noticed the human principles hidden in the design. The machine's function was unclear, but the engineering seemed precise. "I will try," Tomasz said after a moment. "It will take time, but I believe it can be fixed." Lyra nodded, relief flashing across her face. "I trust you. Please, do not worry about the rank or status of those around. You will have my support." As Tomasz began his work, Myra approached him again. "Can I help?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. She had watched him carefully when he repaired her toy and had learned that small hands could make a difference if guided. "Yes," Tomasz said, smiling. "You can hold tools steady or hand me parts. Every small action matters." Together, Tomasz and Myra worked in the chamber. Lyra observed quietly. Unlike a council meeting, where she issued orders, here she was silent, letting the human mechanic and her child work. She realized that she learned something by watching. Strength was not only in commanding others. It was also in listening, observing, and allowing others to contribute. Hours passed. Tomasz studied the machine, disassembling it with careful movements. He noted the fragile wiring and delicate metal work. Myra handed him small parts when he asked, and sometimes she asked questions that made him smile. "Why is it made like this?" she asked at one point, pointing to a small metal coil. "It was made to do something important," Tomasz explained simply. "The parts must work together perfectly, or it cannot function. But sometimes, the way it is made can tell a story." Myra's eyes sparkled. "A story?" "Yes," Tomasz said. "Even machines have stories. They were made by someone who cared, and every choice has meaning." Lyra listened quietly, her mind turning over Tomasz's words. She realized that she had been so focused on rules, crowns, and control that she had forgotten to see the meaning behind simple things. Even the broken toy had a story. Even a child's small effort could hold great importance. By the afternoon, the machine began to take shape again. Tomasz replaced worn parts, tightened circuits, and adjusted delicate wires. Myra continued to assist, carefully following his instructions. She was learning patience, focus, and the value of careful work. Finally, after hours of steady labor, Tomasz stepped back and examined the machine. It looked whole again. The small box shone faintly in the light, more beautiful after repair than it had been before. Lyra leaned closer, her eyes wide. She had not expected such careful attention to detail from someone outside her world. "You did this?" she asked softly, almost in disbelief. "Yes," Tomasz said simply. "It is repaired. It may need further adjustment in time, but it will function." Lyra reached out and touched the box gently. She felt the weight of history and care in her hands. "I cannot thank you enough," she said. "You have done more than repair a machine. You have shown me the value of patience and care." Myra hugged Tomasz lightly. "You fixed it?" "Thank you," she said, her voice bright with excitement. Tomasz smiled at her. "It was teamwork," he said. "You helped too." The Queen observed the scene, and a quiet thought entered her mind. Humans were simple, but their way of seeing the world was different from her people. They did not rely on power or authority. They used their minds and hands, their hearts and patience. It was a lesson she wanted to remember. Lyra turned to Tomasz with a serious expression. "I wish I could reward you properly," she said. "In my world, humans do not often receive recognition. You have earned it more than anyone else in my court." Tomasz shook his head. "I do not need rewards," he said. "I only do what I can. Sometimes, helping is enough." The Queen smiled faintly, realizing that she had underestimated the value of small deeds. Strength and power were not only in armies and thrones. They were also in acts of care, attention, and quiet skill. Tomasz had brought those lessons into her palace without even trying. As the sun began to set outside the palace windows, Lyra looked at her daughter and the human mechanic. She understood something clearly: even the smallest acts of kindness and skill could change hearts and minds. She had seen it with her broken toy, and now she had seen it with a machine that carried the history of her family. Myra held the repaired machine carefully, and Lyra noticed how the child's eyes reflected wonder and trust. The bond between human, child, and queen had grown in that quiet chamber, and it was stronger than any royal decree. Tomasz gathered his tools, preparing to leave. Lyra stepped forward. "Before you go, know that you are welcome here anytime," she said. not as a visitor, but as someone who understands what is truly important. Tomasz nodded, a humble smile on his face. Thank you. I am honored. He left the chamber quietly, leaving behind the repaired machine and the lessons he had brought. Lyra watched him go, her mind full of thought. Strength was not only in rule or command. It was in understanding, patience, and the ability to care. She realized that this human mechanic, simple and skilled, had taught her more than any teacher or counsel ever could. And in the quiet palace, the child held the repaired machine tightly, knowing that even the most fragile things could be made strong again with care and attention. After the repaired machine and the small crystal toy, the palace felt lighter. Lyra moved through the halls with a quiet sense of calm. The stress of ruling and managing the city seemed easier to carry. She still thought often about Tomasz, the human mechanic who had entered her world and shown patience, care, and skill beyond expectations. That morning, the queen called for Tomasz once more. This time, the task was not for her or her child. It was for something larger, something that would test both his patience and creativity. The queen led him to the palace workshop, a vast room filled with machines, tools, and unfinished devices. Some were centuries old, others created by her ancestors. All of them carried the marks of history, but many had been neglected because no one had understood how to fix them. This room has many broken things, Lyra explained. Machines that were once important, but no one could repair them. Perhaps you can help, if you are willing. Tomasz stepped into the room, eyes wide at the rows of equipment. He walked carefully among the devices, noticing the intricate details of alien engineering. Many of the machines were delicate, their functions unclear, but their design suggested purpose and thought. Tomasz ran his hands over one device, feeling the textures and lines. He smiled. I will do my best, he said simply. Lyra watched as he set down his tools and began examining a small device on a table. It was shaped like a miniature vehicle, with delicate metal plates and tiny circuits running along its frame. He studied it closely, turning it over in his hands. Then he set it down and picked up a small toolkit from the table. Tomasz began to work with careful movements. He tightened small screws, adjusted delicate parts, and cleaned circuits that had grown dusty with age. The room was silent except for the soft sounds of his tools and occasional clicks of shifting parts. Myra watched from nearby, her curiosity still strong. She had learned that patience and careful observation could turn broken things into working devices. Can I help again? Myra asked softly, stepping closer to the table. Yes, Tomasz said. You can hand me tools and watch carefully. Some machines are fragile. Every movement must be gentle. Myra nodded and handed him small parts when he asked. Sometimes she tilted her head, asking questions about the design. Tomasz explained in simple words, showing her how small changes could make a big difference. He encouraged her to notice the details, teaching her to see how everything in a machine worked together. Lyra observed quietly. She saw the child learning and the human working, and she realized something important. Humans did not rely on magic or power. They relied on careful observation, steady hands, and the ability to solve problems creatively. Tomasz was not just fixing machines. He was teaching, sharing his way of thinking. Hours passed. Tomasz moved from one machine to another, repairing devices that no one else had been able to fix. He repaired a communication device, a small energy generator, and a fragile mechanical bird similar to Myra's toy. Each time, he worked carefully, explaining the process to Myra and Lyra when appropriate. At one point, Tomasz paused to look at the larger devices. They were more complicated and old. He scratched his head thoughtfully, thinking about how to approach them. Lyra came closer and asked, "Do you need more tools?" Tomasz shook his head. "No, I can manage." Sometimes the answer is not in tools, but in understanding how it was made and how it should work. The Queen nodded, impressed. She realized that patience and intelligence could sometimes achieve what power alone could not. Tomasz's method was simple but effective. He studied, experimented, and adjusted, always observing carefully. By the evening, several machines in the workshop were repaired and functioning. Tomasz wiped his hands and smiled at Myra. "Look what we did," he said. The child's eyes shone with pride. She had helped, and now she could see the result of careful effort. Lyra approached the table and examined the repaired devices. She was amazed at the results. Even machines that had seemed impossible to fix now worked smoothly. The palace workshop, once quiet and abandoned, was alive with movement and energy. "You have done more than I imagined," Lyra said. "These machines are important for the palace and for the city. You have brought life back to tools that were forgotten." Tomasz shrugged. "I only follow what I can see. I look at each part and figure out how it should move or work. If you watch carefully, it all makes sense." The Queen smiled faintly, realizing the truth of his words. In her court, she had always relied on rules, orders, and authority. She gave commands and expected obedience. Tomasz had shown her a different approach. Observation, patience, and creativity could achieve results even a queen's power could not. Myra picked up a small mechanical bird that Tomasz had repaired. "It flies again," she said, letting it glide across the table. Her laughter was bright and soft. Lyra felt her heart lighten as she watched her daughter play. She had learned that small victories, patience, and care could bring happiness in ways power alone never could. Tomasz began to clean his tools as the sun set outside the tall windows. Lyra approached him. "You have done more than repair machines today," she said softly. "You have changed the way I see what is possible." Tomasz looked up and smiled. "I only do what I can," he said. "Sometimes helping with small things teaches bigger lessons than any battle or council ever could." Lyra nodded, realizing the truth in his words. Strength was not always in the sword or the throne. It was also in observation, patience, and the quiet effort to make things work. Humans had a way of seeing the world differently, and Tomasz had brought that vision into her palace. Myra hugged the repaired mechanical bird and ran to Lyra. "Look, mother. Everything works," she exclaimed. Lyra hugged her daughter tightly, feeling a warmth she had not felt in years. She knew that this day would remain in her memory forever. As Tomasz gathered his tools to leave, Lyra spoke again. "You are welcome here anytime. Not just for the machines, but for the lessons you bring. You show what care and patience can do." Tomasz nodded humbly. "Thank you, Your Majesty. That means more than you know." He left the workshop quietly, leaving the palace filled with repaired machines, laughter, and a sense of calm and accomplishment. Lyra stood in the center of the room, watching Myra play, reflecting on the lessons she had learned. The day had taught her that even the most complicated problems could be solved with patience, observation, and ingenuity. And high above, the palace towers glowed softly in the evening light, reflecting the quiet power of care and creativity that Tomasz had brought to the heart of Araval. The palace of Araval was quiet in the early morning. Lyra stood on the balcony of her chambers, looking out over the city. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Below, the streets were slowly coming alive as merchants prepared their shops and citizens moved about their work. The city looked peaceful, yet Lyra's mind was full of thoughts. She thought about the events of the past days. Her daughter's toy, broken and repaired. The old family machine, brought back to life by Tomasz, the human mechanic. The palace workshop, once silent, now hummed with activity. Everything reminded her of one simple truth: even a queen could learn from someone unexpected. Lyra had ruled her world for many years. She had faced difficult decisions, led armies, and made laws that shaped the lives of thousands. She had always believed that strength came from authority, command, and knowledge. Yet, in the quiet moments of the past few days, she realized there was more to strength than she had understood. Patience, care, and understanding were as powerful as any army or law. She thought about Tomasz, the human who had arrived without fanfare, without knowledge of court protocols, and yet had achieved what no one else could. He had not relied on status or title. He had observed, thought carefully, and used his hands and mind to repair what was broken. And in doing so, he had taught her something far greater than mechanical repair. Lyra remembered Myra's small hands helping Tomasz. The child had learned patience, focus, and pride in small efforts. Lyra realized that she had overlooked the importance of such lessons in her own life. She had been so focused on her role as a queen that she had forgotten the simple joys and lessons that came from everyday actions. The queen turned away from the balcony and walked slowly to the palace workshop. The room was quiet now, the machines repaired and shining in the soft morning light. Tomasz had already left for the day, leaving behind a space that felt alive with care and thought. Lyra touched one of the repaired devices. It was smooth, precise, and functional. She smiled softly. Her mind wandered back to her daughter, Myra. The little girl had been sad when her toy was broken. Lyra had felt guilt and sorrow, realizing that her strength as a queen had not helped in that moment. But the human mechanic had changed everything. He had not only repaired the toy but had also restored joy and trust. Lyra thought deeply about this. A queen's duties were vast, but sometimes the smallest acts mattered more than the grandest orders. A word of patience, a careful hand, a willingness to teach, these were acts of true strength. Tomasz had shown her this, and in doing so, had changed her understanding of what it meant to be a leader. She remembered the way Tomasz had worked. He had not rushed. He had not complained. He had studied the broken toy and the old machines with careful attention. Every action had purpose. Every movement had meaning. And through this, he had shown both her and her daughter the power of focus and care. Lyra sat down in a chair, thinking about her own role as a mother. She had always been proud, always concerned with the image of strength she presented to the world. But now she understood that being strong also meant being patient, gentle, and attentive to the needs of those she loved. Her daughter's happiness was more important than appearances or pride. The queen's reflection extended beyond her child. She thought about her people. How often had she relied on commands and authority, expecting obedience without understanding? Perhaps she had overlooked the value of listening, observing, and guiding with care rather than force. Tomasz had arrived from a distant world, yet he had reminded her of lessons she had forgotten. Lyra closed her eyes and imagined a different kind of leadership. One where she could combine her knowledge, her authority, and her care for others. Where she could teach patience, observe the small joys, and guide with wisdom. It was a vision of a queen who led not only with strength but also with understanding. She thought about the future. Myra would grow, and the child would face challenges that required not only courage but also thoughtfulness. Lyra wanted to be the kind of mother who taught by example, showing her daughter that strength was more than power. It was in effort, attention, and love. The queen stood again, walking slowly among the repaired machines in the workshop. Each device told a story. The toy, the family machine, the mechanical bird, all of them represented care, effort, and understanding. Lyra realized that these were lessons she could carry into every part of her life. She paused by the small crystal bird that Myra had played with. Its wings glimmered in the morning light, delicate but strong after repair. Lyra touched it gently, feeling the smooth threads. It was more than a toy. It was a reminder of patience, of careful effort, and of the unexpected ways that lessons could come into life. Her thoughts returned to Tomasz. He had come from a distant world, with no need for recognition or praise. Yet his actions had changed the hearts of both mother and child. Lyra realized that sometimes the most profound teachers were those who did not even seek to teach. She smiled softly, thinking about what she had learned. Leadership, motherhood, and strength could all be improved by care, attention, and patience. Tomasz had reminded her of this simple truth. And now, she could carry it forward in her life, in her role as queen, and in her relationship with her daughter. Lyra walked back to the balcony, looking out at the city again. The streets were full of life, the markets busy, the people moving with purpose. She realized that strength was present in every person, not just in those with titles or crowns. It was in those who worked carefully, observed, and cared. It was in the simple acts that often went unnoticed but carried great meaning. The queen took a deep breath, feeling the morning air fill her lungs. She felt a quiet strength within her, different from the strength of command or authority. It was a strength born of understanding, patience, and attention. It was a strength that came from learning, from observing, and from caring. Lyra thought of Myra once more. She would teach her daughter these lessons, showing her that strength and care could exist together. She would guide her with patience, showing her that even the smallest acts of effort could make a difference in the world. And somewhere in the palace, the repaired machines and toys stood quietly, symbols of the lessons learned. They reminded the queen that even the most fragile things could be made strong again, not by force, but by care, patience, and understanding. The sun rose higher in the sky, and Lyra felt a sense of calm determination. She was ready to face her duties with a new perspective. She understood that true leadership required both strength and empathy, power and patience. She understood that small actions, when guided by care, could change hearts and lives. And for the first time in many years, the queen smiled freely, knowing that she had learned an important truth. Strength was not only in her crown or her throne. Strength was in the ability to observe, care, and repair what was broken in machines, in hearts, and in life itself. The palace of Araval glowed in the soft evening light. Inside the queen's private chamber, Myra sat quietly, holding her small crystal toy. The little bird had been repaired by Tomasz, the human mechanic who had come from a distant world. Its wings were delicate but steady, its crystal threads shimmering as if they had been made new. Myra turned it over in her hands, her eyes bright with wonder. Lyra watched from her chair, a soft smile on her face. Her daughter's joy was a sight she had not experienced in many years. The queen had always been surrounded by the duties of ruling and the weight of expectations, but this moment reminded her of the simpler joys of life. Seeing Myra happy filled her with warmth, and for the first time in days, the queen's heart felt completely light. Myra looked up at her mother. "Mother, it is beautiful again," she said, her voice full of excitement. Tomasz fixed it? I can play with it like before. Lyra nodded. Yes, he did. And he taught us something very important along the way. Myra's eyes sparkled. What did he teach? Lyra thought for a moment. He showed us that patience, care, and effort can repair what is broken. Not everything is fixed with power or strength. Sometimes, the smallest hands and the quietest attention make the biggest difference. Myra hugged her toy tightly and then hugged her mother. I am glad he helped, she said softly. And I am glad he taught me how to help too. The queen leaned down and kissed her daughter's forehead. You did very well, Myra. You were patient, careful, and brave. You helped bring joy back to this little bird. At that moment, the door to the chamber opened quietly. Tomasz entered, carrying a small toolkit. His presence was calm, but his eyes reflected pride in the work he had completed. I came to see how the gift is holding up, he said simply, placing the toolkit on the table. Myra jumped up and ran to him. It is perfect. Look, it flies again. She gently tossed the toy across the table. The little bird glided smoothly, its wings catching the soft light of the lamps. Myra clapped her hands in delight. Tomasz smiled. I am glad it is working well. You two were very patient, and your care made it easier for me to repair. Lyra observed the interaction, realizing how important such lessons were. Tomasz had not only repaired a toy, but he had also taught patience, responsibility, and cooperation. Even in the small actions of children and humans, there was a wisdom that could be valuable to a queen. I must thank you, Lyra said. Not only for repairing the toy, but for teaching us something more important. You have reminded me that strength comes not only from power but also from attention and care. Tomasz shook his head humbly. I only did what anyone would do. The most important things are often the simplest. Myra looked at him seriously. You are not like anyone else I know. You see things carefully and fix them. And you teach us too. Tomasz smiled softly. That is very kind of you to say. But the real lesson is that you can do it too. Care and patience are not only for mechanics. They are for anyone who wants to make things better. Lyra felt her heart swell with pride for her daughter. Myra was learning lessons she herself had forgotten long ago. Strength, patience, and attention to detail, these qualities were now being passed to the next generation. The queen leaned closer and picked up the small crystal bird. She examined it carefully, noting the repaired threads and the smooth lines of the wings. This is more than a toy, she said softly. It is a symbol of learning, patience, and care. It is a reminder of what matters in life, even for a queen. Myra's eyes widened. A symbol? For me? Yes, Lyra said, smiling. For you, for me, and for everyone who sees it. It reminds us that even when something seems broken, it can be made whole again with effort and love. The child hugged the toy tightly, feeling the importance of her small creation. She had learned that mistakes and accidents did not mean the end. With patience, care, and guidance, anything could be repaired. Tomasz watched quietly, feeling satisfaction in what had been accomplished. It was rare to see such simple joy and meaningful lessons combined. Humans, aliens, and children could all learn from each other if they were willing to observe and care. As the evening grew darker outside, Lyra spoke again. Tomasz, you have changed the way we see the world. Not only have you repaired the toy, but you have also restored faith, happiness, and understanding. Tomasz shook his head gently. I did nothing extraordinary. I only used what I know. The real effort came from you and your daughter. You both cared enough to make it work. The queen smiled, realizing how modest the human was. His actions had a greater effect than he understood. He had restored more than a toy. He had restored joy, hope, and lessons that would last a lifetime. Myra placed the bird on the table and looked at her mother and Tomasz. "Can we repair more things like this?" she asked. "I want to learn, and I want to help." Lyra nodded. "Yes, Myra. And I want to learn too. We will practice patience, care, and attention together. We will repair what is broken and cherish what is whole." Tomasz smiled at the two of them. "Then we will have a good team. Careful hands and patient minds can do amazing things." The queen looked at her daughter and then at the human mechanic. She felt a deep sense of gratitude. This day, this moment, was more valuable than any royal celebration or council victory. It reminded her that life was built on small acts of care, patience, and understanding. These acts could restore not only toys and machines but also hearts and trust. Myra picked up the toy once more and gently tossed it into the air. The crystal bird glided smoothly and landed safely in her hands. She laughed softly, her joy echoing through the quiet palace chamber. Lyra felt a warmth in her chest that had not been there for a long time. She realized that this day had changed her. She had learned that leadership and love were not separate. They were intertwined. The ability to care, to observe, and to act with patience was a form of strength she would carry into every decision she made. Tomasz gathered his tools and prepared to leave for the evening. Lyra approached him. "You are welcome here anytime," she said. "Not just to repair things, but to remind us of what is truly important." Tomasz nodded humbly. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I am honored to have helped." As he left the chamber, Myra waved to him. "Goodbye, Tomasz. Thank you for teaching me." Lyra smiled, watching her daughter hold the restored toy close. She knew that the lessons learned that day would remain with Myra forever. Small acts of patience, care, and thoughtfulness could repair what seemed broken and bring light where there was sorrow. And in the soft evening light of Araval, the little crystal bird glimmered gently on the table. It was more than a toy. It was a symbol of hope, of learning, and of the power of human ingenuity. The gift was restored, and with it, a bond of trust, love, and understanding had been made whole once more. The morning sun rose over the city of Araval, casting golden light across the palace towers. Inside her chambers, Queen Lyra stood at the window, watching the city below. The streets were alive with people, merchants, and children moving through their daily routines. The palace itself felt lighter and warmer, filled with the lessons learned over the past days. Myra was nearby, carefully placing her repaired toys on a small shelf. Each piece held meaning, a reminder of patience, effort, and care. The little crystal bird, now fully restored, rested in the center, its wings gleaming in the morning light. Myra smiled as she looked at it, remembering the human who had taught her so much. Lyra turned from the window as the chamber door opened quietly. Tomasz stepped in, carrying his toolkit as always. He moved calmly, his presence steady and unassuming. Yet, in the eyes of the queen and her daughter, he was more than a mechanic. He was a teacher, a helper, and someone who had restored not only broken things but also hope and joy. "Good morning," Tomasz said softly, placing his tools on the table. "I thought I would stop by and see how things are today." Myra ran to him immediately. "Hello, Tomasz. Look, everything is perfect. The toys, the bird, everything works." She held the little crystal bird high. You taught me so much. Tomasz smiled warmly. I am glad. But remember, it was your patience and care that helped the most. Lyra approached, her expression thoughtful. Tomasz, you have done more than repair toys and machines. You have shown my daughter and me lessons that cannot be taught in books or counsels. You have reminded us of the value of patience, care, and understanding. Tomasz shook his head humbly. I only used what I know. Every human learns by observing and practicing. You and Myra did the same. That is why it worked. Lyra nodded slowly. She had come to understand that strength and wisdom were not always about power, titles, or knowledge of laws. Sometimes, the smallest acts of attention and the quiet effort to help others carried the greatest importance. Tomasz had shown her that even a queen could learn from someone who came from a distant world with simple skills and patience. Myra looked between her mother and Tomasz. Can we fix more things today? She asked eagerly. I want to learn even more. The human mechanic chuckled softly. Yes, we can. There are many things to repair and learn from. The most important part is paying attention and caring about what you do. Lyra smiled at her daughter. Then we shall learn together. I wish to continue this with both of you. Strength and care must go hand in hand. The Queen's words carried weight. Myra's eyes sparkled with excitement, and Tomasz felt satisfaction in seeing the two so eager to continue. He realized that his journey to Araval had grown into something greater than he had imagined. It was no longer just about repairing broken machines. It was about building understanding, confidence, and connection across worlds. The three of them moved to the workshop. Rows of machines and devices awaited attention, many of them broken for years. Tomasz showed Myra how to examine each device, how to notice which parts were worn, and how to handle fragile pieces with care. Lyra observed, learning how to guide her daughter without commanding, allowing patience and observation to lead the way. Hours passed quickly as they worked together. Myra learned the importance of careful hands and steady focus. Lyra learned that leadership could be gentle and supportive, and Tomasz reinforced the value of quiet observation, patience, and problem solving. Each repaired machine carried more than function, it carried a lesson. At one point, Tomasz handed Myra a small device. This is delicate, he explained. You must be very careful. Every movement matters. Myra nodded, her small hands steady. She worked carefully, and the device slowly came back to life under her touch. She looked at Tomasz and smiled. It worked. Thank you for showing me how to do this. Tomasz smiled back. You did it? I only guided you. Patience and care made the difference. Lyra watched her daughter and the human mechanic, feeling a deep sense of pride. This day, like the days before, reminded her that leadership, care, and teaching could create more lasting strength than power alone. Her daughter was learning lessons that would last a lifetime. She herself was learning them again. When evening came, the palace was quiet once more. The repaired devices, toys, and machines filled the workshop, each representing the effort, patience, and care of three different beings. Myra placed the crystal bird carefully in the center, smiling at its shining wings. Lyra approached Tomasz. You have changed our lives, she said softly. You are more than a mechanic. You have taught lessons of patience, attention, and care. You have reminded us of the importance of small acts that repair not only machines but hearts and minds. Tomasz shook his head. I am honored by your words, Your Majesty. I only did what I could. The real lessons came from you and your daughter. You both cared enough to make everything work. Myra ran to Tomasz and hugged him tightly. "Thank you for teaching me. I will remember everything you showed me." Lyra watched the exchange with a sense of quiet happiness. She realized that this human, who had arrived unexpectedly, had become part of their lives in a meaningful way. He had bridged worlds, showing that even those from different planets and experiences could share knowledge, care, and friendship. As Tomasz gathered his tools to leave for the night, Lyra spoke once more. "You are welcome in this palace anytime. Not just to repair, but to teach, to guide, and to remind us of what truly matters." Tomasz nodded humbly. "Thank you. That means more than you know." He left the chamber quietly, leaving behind a palace filled with warmth, learning, and hope. Myra held the crystal bird, her eyes shining with wonder. Lyra sat in her chair, reflecting on all that had happened. The past days had taught her that strength and care were not separate. They worked together, creating understanding, joy, and wisdom. The queen thought of her daughter, of Tomasz, and of the lessons learned. She realized that even in a palace full of wealth and power, the greatest treasures were patience, understanding, and love. These were the qualities that repaired hearts, taught lessons, and built bonds stronger than any title or crown. High above, the towers of Araval glowed softly in the evening light. Inside, a child played with her repaired toys, a queen reflected on her new understanding, and a human mechanic had left a mark on their hearts that could never be forgotten. Lyra smiled, knowing that life was full of small miracles, lessons, and acts of care. And sometimes, the simplest people, a human, a child, and a queen willing to learn, could change a world quietly but forever. The crystal bird flapped its delicate wings, shining softly in the warm light. It was no longer just a toy. It was a symbol of learning, care, patience, and the unexpected power of kindness. It reminded them that even the most broken things could be made whole again, and that even the simplest actions could create lasting change. And in that quiet moment, Queen Lyra, her daughter Myra, and the human mechanic Tomasz knew that their lives had been forever connected by a lesson that went beyond machines, toys, and crowns. It was a lesson about the power of attention, patience, and heart, a lesson that no one would ever forget.